Hi, I'm Joshua Frame. I'm National Chair of the Federal Youth Network, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's event, which is accessibility tools that everyone can use. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which I'm based is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. The Algonquin peoples have lived on this land since time immemorial. We're grateful to have the opportunity to be present in this territory. I'd also like to acknowledge that our participants and panelists are joining us from a variety of traditional lands from across Canada. Je veux mentionner que pour cette session aujourd'hui, vous pouvez parler dans la langue de votre choix et en français. Sorry, I realized my video is just having an issue, so hopefully that will get resolved in a moment. I'll begin by introducing our panelists today. We have three panelists joining us who will share some of their lived experiences and give us an introduction on AACT and share some practical tools to help us make events accessible. First off, Jeffrey Stark has been working in this field for over 20 years and is widely regarded as an expert in inclusive and accessible information and communication technologies. He is currently a manager within the AACT program in SSC, and he's been the spokesperson for a number of accessibility initiatives in Canada. He leads a world-class group that is internationally recognized for the work it does and continues to be a driving force for the digital inclusion of people with disabilities. He is joined by Russell Pruce, an adaptive technology support specialist also at SSC. Russell helps employees with disabilities by adapting computers to their specific needs and consults on accessibility in the built environment and emerging technologies like wayfinding, Bluetooth beacons, and Microsoft 365. And our final panelist is Anna Laurie Smith, an analyst with the Office of the Deputy Minister of Public Service Accessibility at the Treasury Board Secretariat. Prior to joining the government, she was finishing her master's degree in Women and Gender Studies and working at Planned Parenthood, Ottawa. She joined the government in 2019 and currently sits on the board of directors for Centertown Citizens Ottawa Corporation. She remains passionate about and committed to equitable access for all in our diverse communities. So thank you to our three panelists for joining us today. Merci à nos panélistes pour nous joindre aujourd'hui. Okay, so we'll start off with a period of questions, and I will say that for our participants, please pose your questions using the Q&A function in the Zoom application that will be on your screen. And when we get to the Q&A portion, we will pose those questions to our panelists. So the first question is to you, Anna Laurie. So prior to joining the government, you worked in the private sector for a number of years. What attracted you to make the jump to government?
Oh, hello. What attracted me, honestly, to make the move to government was just the opportunity to continue my career in accessibility and inclusion, but to continue it in something that was more permanent. Because I think if we're really honest, if it's a youth federal network, I really love the fact that I have a career where I can explore my passion and I can use my degree, and yet there's so many opportunities that are available to me, especially as an indeterminate employee. So I think all of that really attracted me to the government.
Awesome, thanks very much. Okay, our next question, so to Jeffrey and Russell. So when did AACT come into place, and what does it mean for us government employees? Jeffrey, maybe we'll start with you.
It's always the challenge with the mute and the unmute button. So I think it's worth highlighting, and I may just go into a couple of quick things along the way during our little opportunity to chat here, and just say we've been in this space 30 years now, and we've been doing this stuff the hard way. Like, we've learned a lot of lessons sort of the difficult way. 30 ans avec l'attribution d'un ordinateur par employé, on s'est rendu compte que le fait qu'on était en train de créer des barrières pour nos employés, et on a cherché pour de l'expertise au sein du secteur privé et public, il n'existait pas, et on a dû le chercher dans les universités aux États-Unis. So fast forward to today, now we're internationally recognized for what we do. We have a whole hub and network of supports and knowledgeable people that we've been working across the entire government of Canada space. And we offer services from coast to coast to coast in kind of 3 areas of work. Really in the areas of things for people. So from simple to complex solutions, like for example, even if you were in a full body cast and all you could do was breathe, we could still give you computer access. I usually joke and say, you know, no sick leave for anybody, but really at the end of the day, what that means is that there isn't a lack of solutions, whether we're talking visual, hearing, cognitive, learning, invisible, visible disabilities, injury, dexterity, physical access, all kinds of areas. There's all kinds of solutions. And really what our team tries to do is line up the resources, knowledge, experience, lessons learned, and best practices to kind of allow managers and employees to explore options. So that could be as simple as changing the way you work on the computer to as complicated as planning for a degenerative condition. And really the thing that I think makes our team special is that we believe very strongly nothing about us without us, in that over half of the team have a disability in addition to being experts in their area of study or field of expertise, whether we're talking trainers or technicians, developers, or QA folk, inclusive design specialists, or researchers. And we do a lot to kind of support departments. So I'll just say we do training, we do testing, we do evaluations, we look at new technologies. But if you don't know where to start, if you have a question, if you're running into a barrier, or on the other side, if you're trying to make your environments more inclusive, trying to create a more accessible set of activities, or looking at a topic like we're talking about today, which is how do we make virtual meetings, virtual sessions, and remote work more inclusive or more disability inclusive. And those could be topics of an info session or a one-on-one consultation or group session. Anybody anywhere in the federal government can come to learn about the topic. They can ask a question. We have a central mailbox. There's people manning it on a daily basis, and they slot people in often, you know, next week or earlier, based on first come, first serve on any of those topics. So info sessions is the one thing that I would say you should walk away from or walk away with as a good starting point, because you will be mailed a whole set of resources, tools, and technologies, best practices, and knowledge based on lived experience. So from that side, you get homework. I'm a firm believer in giving people homework, and you'll see out of this session, one of the things that we will send around is a whole package of information, everything we referenced today, everything we talk about, and tools and resources so that you can action concretely your work in this space. So then I might just hand it off to Russell, who can talk a little bit about, if we were running an info session on this topic, what topics we would generally cover, and maybe show some of the tools and technology in that space quickly.
Sure. Thanks for that, Jeff. As always, Jeff is very thorough. So there's really not a lot more for me to say, to be honest, other than to do the demos. But I will say that the info session is definitely extremely important, and it's really how we connect with everybody in the federal government. And as far as the question of what does it mean for government employees, it means that anybody can be accommodated in the government. If you have a disability, you don't have to worry about, you know, losing your job or not being able to do the work, or, you know, how am I going to buy these tools, or how, like, what do I even need to be able to accommodate myself? You know, you can let us be the experts in that area, and we work with your management, your IT people, your disability management people, facilities, et cetera, all the stakeholders. And all you have to do is simply just show up to work and, you know, do the job that you were hired to do. And that's where you're the expert. So you can be the expert in the stuff you're the expert in, and all the other stuff we can take care of. And we actually prepared a very short video that kind of shows this off that I would like to play for you now. And hopefully Zoom will cooperate and will let us do that. Yes, here we go.
An employee uses computer screen while typing with one finger. A delivery person arrives with a large box labeled Adaptive Technology. A person pops out of the box holding signs that say Monitor Arm, Touch Typing Lessons, Screen Magnification Software, and Desktop Magnifier. Now, the employee is smiling and typing with both hands while viewing large print on an electronic magnifier and raised computer screen. At AAACT, we have the right tools and solutions for people with disabilities. Call 1-866-442-2228 now to get started.
Boxes do not actually contain humans. Solutions may contain more or different tools than shown.
Yeah, so you get the idea. It's pretty cool. That's pretty much what I do on a day-to-day basis. My gig is that I am helping individuals, helping, you know, people just like you and I around the government who may need to interact with the computer slightly differently. And we have all sorts of off-the-shelf software and hardware, but also things like making sure that documents are accessible, or making sure that the inclusiveness is built in to begin with. One of the things that I want to talk about briefly is the document accessibility stuff that we have going on. So I'm just going to share my screen one more time and show that off. Give me one sec. So this is one of the things that we've been contributing to, is the Government of Canada's Digital Accessibility Toolkit. And as you can see, there's all sorts of information on here about how to make documents accessible. So we have accessible document guides for Office 365 and Office 2016, depending on what version you are running in your department. But we also have our inclusive design guides, which is really excellent too. So think about, you know, how would you design an infographic or a document or a poster or whatever it is for somebody who's on the autism spectrum, for someone who has a cognitive disability, for someone who's low vision, for someone who uses a screen reader, etc. And these are just, you know, very simple principles that you might want to keep in mind so that you can make sure that your content is as accessible and inclusive as it can be for everybody. So all this is here on this page. We will be sharing this information with you after the fact. I can give a quick demo of some of the document accessibility stuff that you can just take away from this meeting right away and start to put into practice. One of the nice things about Microsoft Office is that every version of Microsoft Word going back many, many years has a built-in accessibility checker. And so what you can do is that I have this document here about protecting the Great Lakes. And I can just go to File and Info, I believe, and I can check for issues and check accessibility. Sometimes you may need to convert older documents in order to get the accessibility checker to run. But you can see that once you run the accessibility checker, it will come up with some warnings or issues on here. So for example, if you don't have things set up properly for a table, or if you're not using headings in your document, or if images don't have alt text, for example, text that would be required for if someone's blind, then they can have the computer read out what is actually in the image, for example, then that's all available over here on the right-hand side when you open the accessibility checker. And you can simply click on the item. It'll tell you why you should fix it and how to fix it, and you can just go about doing it, and then you're pretty much finished. And for other things and more information, there's a website on Microsoft's website that they have a whole section on how to make documents accessible and how to use all the accessibility features within Office 365.
Awesome, that looks great. Thanks very much, Russell. Next question over to you, Anna-Lori. So what does nothing without us mean? Alors, que signifie rien sans nous?
Hello. I think that nothing without us, the whole spirit of it, is to create policies and programs and services that are accessible, but to create them with people with disabilities, or to have people with disabilities direct the program and services. Because I think that very often well-meaning people, and they always mean well, is that they create programs and services that are aimed to make the world more accessible and more inclusive, but they forget to include the people with the lived experiences who could benefit from these programs and services. So I know that with our office, I loved it because it was the very first time that I went into an office where I was not the first person with a disability who they ever hired, which is often the case. And it's stressful because you're kind of their guinea pig, and they don't know, like they've never accommodated anyone before. And so I always say that until this point, it's always felt like I've had 2 full-time jobs, because you have the actual job that you're hired to do, and then your second full-time job is advocating for your accommodations, making sure that your boss actually gets the software, like the tools that you need to perform your job. So now it's just so wonderful. We're like at the Treasury Board, even though it was a bit of like, it was a while ago when I got hired. So even though there was a bit of a lag, now it's just so wonderful to go to work and to not have to worry about, am I going to be accommodated? Am I going to be able to finish this task on time? Will my manager understand if I say, can I please have extra time with this task because of my learning disability? Like, that's just all a given. So it's really nice to have a job where it's a bunch of people with disabilities who have not only the lived experience, but also the expertise to really direct the channel of what we're doing, which is to make the public service more accessible.
Absolutely. We had a question in the chat that I'll pose to the three of you. So the question was, being a term employee and trying to bring up accommodation needs. Do you have a suggestion on how to sort of start that conversation with your supervisor? I think the underlying theme is a general nervousness around raising accommodation concerns when you're a term employee and looking for your next contract extension, and just sort of the feeling that it could hamper your continued career success. So would anyone like to chime in on that?
I think it would be great for Jeff to chime in about our lending library project, which addresses this exact issue.
Awesome.
Jeff, you want to give that a shot?
Yeah, so I would just first say that for me, one of the biggest things that one sort of comes to terms with along sort of one's career is that you're doing just as much of a disservice to yourself by not speaking up, because an employer can't provide you with what you need if they don't know what it is. And it's better that you be given the longest possible opportunity to demonstrate how great an employee you are, rather than trying to sort of work around the system. And I mean, from our side, there's a number of things that we've seen as elements that contribute to the success of this. A good communication between manager and employee, or supervisor and employee, is really important. Having that network of peers to link up with and to talk about. Some of the time our team plays that role. We can also link people to other people and other individuals to kind of bounce ideas off of. Having a mentor is a really good thing. And then leading into, well, the tools, technologies, best practices, and systems of the government shouldn't be something that takes forever to put in place. And that's one of the reasons that with Treasury Board, we've essentially, it'll be announced at December 3rd, but we soft launched it this year, and we'll be launching it officially for the International Day of People with Disabilities, a lending library. So in terms of equipment, employees get fast-tracked through a quick accommodation process. We can ship equipment, we can put tools at people's desks, sometimes even the same day they meet with us, where we ship it out or we identify stuff. It's theirs for the period of their short-term employment, and they return it to us when they are either indeterminate or when they leave the government. And that allows departments to have the tools, the latest technology, the latest services, the latest solutions available to their employees quickly, which for us was one of the biggest challenges we were seeing in terms of getting people up and productive and with the right solution. So to me, it's those three things in combination. It's having access to tools and expertise, skills, having a support network, and being comfortable with highlighting that it's okay to have a disability. It's everybody. The only people who are normal are the people you have not met. We are all different. And that difference is going to come in a whole bunch of different perspectives, whether we have a disability or not. So talking about your needs, whether you have a disability or not, is part of a good level of communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just echo, some of your thoughts to say that in order to be successful in your career as a person with a disability, I think you need to be able to have the courage to go to your supervisor and address any needs as early as possible. Because I think, having seen it from the management side, sometimes we see it at the end at, 8 or 12 months into, sort of a performance management cycle where people say, oh, actually, I do have an accommodation need. I was nervous to bring it up. And it certainly creates a better environment for you to be successful, to enable your success if you're bringing up these needs as early in the process as possible, for sure. So we have a number of questions coming in. So I think there are some questions around the workshops and if they're recorded and shared. I can tell you that certainly this session today will be shared on our YouTube channel in about a week and a half time after we finish editing but Russell, maybe just around the workshops that you host, how are those sort of hosted to get the maximum sort of number of departments and attendees to understand the tools?
So there's a couple parts to that. If we're talking about the info sessions that we were mentioning before, those are typically one-on-one consultations if we're talking about an individual with a disability that requires accommodation. Or it would be a group that's, for example, working on a project. So let's say they're building a new system, or they're about to purchase like a new system or a tool that the individuals in the government are going to have to use, and they want to make sure that it's accessible. Well, that's when they might have their whole team come in and talk to us, and we can talk to them about the importance of making sure that you follow the digital accessibility standards, etc. If you're talking about things like our document accessibility workshops, which I had answered a question for somebody else earlier about, those are just open to anybody in the GC. We host them quarterly. And as it turns out, the next one that we're having is next week on the 24th. And so people who want to attend are welcome to do so. But that kind of thing is more of a, it's a 3-hour-long workshop, and it's more of a, anybody who wants to come in the government is welcome to come. And we go through all of the best practices and how to make sure your documents are accessible, how to run the accessibility checker, things to watch out for, etc. And we essentially market it as far and wide as we can, because we want as many people to come and benefit from that information as possible, because really, in our opinion, document accessibility is one of the biggest low-hanging fruits that is available to make sure that we kind of make sure that that part is taken care of, and then you're going to really make a big difference for a lot of people. Because, for example, if you're someone who uses a screen reader and the document's not accessible, that could be the difference between, you know, being able to actually read the document and not being able to read it. Same for if you're like filling out forms and you're using voice recognition and you want to be able to just talk to the computer and tell the computer, I want to put this in this form field. Well, if that's not accessible, then that's an issue. So that's kind of the types of things that we do. The info sessions are much more frequent. We have them, I mean, Thursdays are typically our day. Jeff likes to say that we have them back to back to back, and it's like all day for individuals. And we meet with groups, we meet with individuals, we meet with their managers, etc. But yeah, that's typically how it works from our end.
And I'll just highlight that we just launched this week our virtual learning series, which is taking place from December to February, March. We're using Microsoft Live as it's our first foray down that road. And if all goes well, so there will be recordings for those sessions. And we're doing the whole bevy of common sessions that we give. So everything from No Wrong Door, which talks about sort of the process, the tools, the technology, and the pieces, to specific adaptive technology workshops like adapting your computer for low vision or for cognitive disabilities or learning disabilities, or sessions on document accessibility again. So we do a mix of all of those, and it's definitely our goal to be doing more out in the open. That's one of the reasons why, for example, we created that digital accessibility toolkit interdepartmentally, was to have somewhere to share material related to one of the major topic areas we work in.
Yeah, that makes sense. Next question from the Q&A, sort of specific to somebody's experience. So they shared that they have a visual impairment, and their experience so far with telework has been that it's less accessible than working on site, especially with respect to webcams, which are calibrated for non-visually impaired people, and give sort of a strange angle in terms of an extreme close-up of their forehead and scalp whenever they use them. So the question is, will employees with disabilities be given priority when it comes to gradually phasing back to being at least 10% on site? And if not, why not? I'll just maybe preface this question by saying that I think everyone's sort of accommodation needs are very different. And I think some of the findings from greater telework has been that it enables more people to be active in the workforce who have accommodation needs that might not be able to be ideally accommodated in a physical workplace outside of their home. But can you comment maybe on the, yes.
I'm just chomping at the bit a little bit, because I will say that I am someone with low vision who does fit into that same category, and that would actually be a common type of request for an info session, as in, I'm now working remotely. What do I do? What kind of tools are available? How might I change things? You come in for an hour, we hash out issues, items, technologies, tools, approaches. Often, for example, for the item that was mentioned in the question, like the camera, well, there are external cameras you can get that just plug into your computer, and then you can have your screen in one place and your camera somewhere else. And so a lot of it kind of is going to be custom, and you will get that summary. So out of that, any one-on-one consultation with us, within a week, you get mailed a summary that says, here's the tools we talked about, here's the best practices, here's the solutions, here's what we've seen that's worked and hasn't. And if more is required, we work with departments beyond that.
Excellent. So this sounds, I think, like a great time for the person to reach out.
That would be my recommendation.
And be able to figure something out. Because I think a lot of people's accommodation needs are stuff that can be addressed. It's just often managers who don't necessarily know how to address those. So I think the work you're doing is very valuable in that space for sure.
We definitely shifted to remote work, and we actually were able to do it as a team. So almost 40 people with covering all the various disabilities remotely within over a weekend. So basically on the Friday, we decided we were working remotely. On the Monday, we were up and going and employees had stuff at their desks. Our staff, we were a bit creative, but I'll just say that a lot of it is, as you said, management allowing or management being encouraged to be flexible and leverage their own already, all the responsibility and power and decision making they already have.
Absolutely. Next question. In terms of, so I think lots of us have heard about invisible disabilities. And that's one of the themes for the International Day for Persons with Disabilities events on December 3rd. But what are invisible disabilities, and how do they get identified in the application or accommodation process? Alors, quels sont les handicaps invisibles et comment sont-ils identifiés dans une procédure de candidature ou d'hébergement? Who would like to start with this one?
Okay. Who would like to go first? Okay, would I be able to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much.
Okay, so for myself, I have a learning disability. So I have cerebral palsy, so that impacts my physical mobility, but also it impacts the way that I process information. So even though I'm smart, I process information like I need more time to process information, and I need a quiet environment. And so for me, it was quite easy to identify, like to talk to my manager and to say, well, I need accommodations for my learning disability, because I know that I've always needed accommodations for my disability. Like it's something I've had since I was in high school. So I knew right away that I wanted like a screen reader, and I needed Dragon Naturally Speaking. So that's like a speech to text software. So for myself, that really helped. But it's important to know that not everyone has that trajectory where they always knew that they had a learning disability and where they have the confidence to be open about it. And I think that for me, as somebody who also has a visible disability, it's not as much of a coming out ordeal, because whenever you have an invisible disability, you don't know, do I want to say this? Do I want to look different? And especially when your job is like more precarious, it's a bit more of a scary situation, or it shouldn't be a scary situation, but because of the stigma, it can be a scary situation. But I know that for myself, like it's really helped to have the tools that I need to be able to do my job.
Can I add to that, Josh? Do you mind?
Yeah, absolutely.
I will say in my experience, because most of my job is accommodating individuals with disabilities directly, a lot of the time, an individual who has an invisible disability, I find, is typically more reluctant to discuss it or seek accommodation out on their own than someone who has a quote unquote more traditional or visible disability, like being low vision or having a mobility impairment or something like that. And so often what happens with respect to our accommodation plans is that if an individual is, perfectly open about it and happy to discuss it and whatnot, great. But there are a lot of people who aren't like that. And so a lot of the time, an individual may come to us and say, I definitely need something to help me out here, but I don't necessarily want to look different. I don't want to look as though I'm getting special treatment. I don't want to look as though I'm somewhat differently abled or different in general than all of my other colleagues. And sometimes an individual might say, I know that I have this, my manager knows about it, but I don't really want any of my other colleagues knowing that I have a disability. And so part of what my job is and the job of our team is to make sure that we're taking that into consideration, because we could give somebody something that accommodates them, but if it makes their quality of life or quality of life at the workplace worse because you're essentially outing them as having a disability, then that's not really going to solve the problem. So a lot of what we do in that situation is about, okay, how can we find something that accommodates the individual while still being discreet and respecting the individual's privacy?
And I might just ask you there, Russell, to really quickly show an example of one of the things that is built into Microsoft, the immersive reader. And I'll just say that one of the things that our other side of our team does is we advocate for the inclusion of requirements related to functionality in mainstream products. So we talk with industry, we talk with companies, we talk with areas, and Microsoft is a good example of a company that has a fairly good receptiveness to this topic. And if we look at the most common thing that we get asked in terms of learning disabilities, as an example, like dyslexia, is something called multimodal reading. And I'll hand it to you there, Russell, since I see you have it ready.
Yeah, so this is just my super short document of notes that I took about what we were going to talk about today. And in Microsoft Word, in Office 365, there's this wonderful, wonderful feature that we love called Immersive Reader. And you can find it by going to the View tab. And so if you click on it here, you can see it totally changes the way that the document looks. And everything is customizable right down to the spacing between the font. I mean, it really exists specifically for individuals who have learning disabilities so that you can make sure that the content is laid out in the best way for the individual specifically. So I could change the column width, I could make it super wide or super narrow. I could change the page color. We have a lot of individuals who are really having trouble with a bright white page color, but they might prefer something that's either high contrast, like the black here, or maybe just a different color entirely. So maybe I like this, what is this one called? Light blue. I can change it to that. I can have the software focus on line by line as opposed to just showing me the whole document so that it really helps the individual to focus. And I can also have text spacing turned on and off. So if I have it like this, you can see that it's all kind of close together. If I turn the text spacing on, it spaces it out a bit more, so it's a little easier to read. And then, of course, I can have it read out loud too. So let's demo that.
Food presentation. Short intro video. https://www.youtube.com/watch?mark v=necmd-mc9gy. Jeff introduces program. 2 minutes or less.
So you get the idea. And of course, you can change the reading speed and you can choose either a male or a female voice. And essentially in Windows, if you have Windows 10, any language pack that you have installed, so if you've got like Canadian English, British English, but also like Canadian French, etc., all the system voices for all those languages will appear as options. So you can have it read French documents as well. So often I have clients who, you know, they're very smart, they're very bright, but they just have like either a visual processing issue or something where it's just easier if the computer talks to them. Well, this is a really great way. You can change all sorts of different things and you can really customize it to the individual. You know, maybe the individual doesn't want just one line here to be the focus. Maybe they don't want the whole thing to be visible, but maybe they need like maybe 3 or 5 lines. Well, you can do something like this and it makes a world of difference for a lot of individuals. So
and
that's Immersive Reader.
What's really great is it's in there for free. It's already built in. Nobody has to ask for anything special. The functionality is in the Office suite. As long as you get the Office suite, the latest version, you get all that functionality. And they're now extending it even further. So if you're using the latest version of Microsoft Edge, their browser, it goes in there too. So you get that same functionality when browsing the web. So not just looking at it from an individual's need, but also making sure that it's in those kind of requirements are in the actual foundational tools that we use in the government.
That's great. And is this functionality available in Excel and PowerPoint as well, like in terms of that same experience?
It's available in Outlook and Word and I believe PowerPoint. I don't think it's in Excel, but it's also available for all the web versions of those tools. So once departments start moving more and more towards M365, which is, you know, SSC has already entirely moved there and a lot of other departments are following suit. A lot of these people are going to have access to the tools on the web as well for collaboration purposes. And all that stuff's available on the web as well. But I don't think it's in Excel, but I think it's in everything else.
Okay, that makes sense. There's a question just in the chat around, is the technology permitted for protected B information? They say sometimes security rules seem to block accessibility tools.
So I have great news for you. Microsoft likes us so much because we are a ginormous contributor to their bottom line that they built up a ton of servers in this country for us specifically. So that means that stuff on SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive, etc., as long as you've got it set to private, is all certified protected B. And that also includes stuff that we just showed you, like the immersive reader. You can even dictate to your computer in Word in certain departments. I'm not sure if every department has this turned on, but at least in SSC, the dictation feature within Word is available. So you don't actually need Dragon Naturally Speaking, for example, unless you actually want to control your entire computer. And that can also be used for protected B information because Microsoft built the servers to let us do it, which is really great news.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, next question. So we had one in the chat around converting an Office document to PDF. And will the accessibility tracker settings transfer to the PDF? Or will an additional check be required after the conversion of the file?
I think I'm going to let Jeff take this one.
Well, I'll say that yes and no. If you go to the guides that we mentioned earlier under Office 365, there's one specifically around PDFs, and it does cover kind of the steps to get from point A to point B. It is a lot harder to make a fully accessible PDF compared to Word, EPUB, or HTML. So just it's a little bit more work, and it requires a bit more knowledge from a technical standpoint.
It's possible.
So the answer is sort of.
Yeah, but that's a great, that would be an example of a really good question to ask during our document accessibility workshop, because that's like a big, long thing where we go into all the in-depth nitty-gritty stuff. But of course,
and they actually do cover PDFs during that.
Yeah, and they'll show demos and demonstrate it for you right there.
Okay, awesome. Next question is for Anna Laurie. What tools is the government using for a screen reader?
I know that pretty well. I'm just repeating what was just said, but Microsoft 365 is just incredible. I mean, I just learned about a month ago, by accident, I realized that there was a read aloud feature, and I love how it's built into the general technology. So I use that read aloud feature to read all of my emails, and I use it to read my PowerPoint, and I read it to use all of my documents. And it's really interesting because with that feature, that's just built in, but at least it's not an extra cost. Whereas whenever I got Kurzweil, it's quite expensive. So I love the fact that instead of having to get a separate program that's quite expensive and to go through all those hurdles, I love the fact that for anyone in the government, just being able to go on Microsoft 365 and access that read aloud part, that's pretty well what we're doing, and I think it's great.
Okay, awesome. We had a question come in through the Q&A just around the rollout of 365. I think that has been varied in different departments, and over time it will roll out to all departments. But Russell,
it depends on the department. So one of the things that I do as part of my job is I work a lot on emerging technologies like M365, and I sit on a working group of like early adopters and whatnot for SSC. I can tell you in SSC it's already done, but other departments are not the same. Every department has its own process, and unfortunately I don't have them all memorized. But like, I would say that in SSC we're definitely the furthest ahead of all of them. Like, I don't know that there's any other department that has all the desktop apps already rolled out, plus having everything certified protected B, etc. But yeah, I would check with your department. If you guys have like, most departments have their own 365 team put together that's responsible for the rollout. If you can manage to find a contact for that group, I would recommend emailing them. Typically the service desk isn't really going to know the answer to that question. But yeah, sorry, I don't really have a better answer for you, but I can tell you at SSC, it's definitely further ahead than most other places.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I think it will be rolled out to all public servants. I think we heard early on in the pandemic that some departments were able to sort of accelerate their rollout. I'm thinking specifically of GAC that I had heard they had a sort of 12-month rollout plan, and then at the beginning of the pandemic, we're able to shorten that to 5 days. But not all.
That's basically what happened with us too. It was pretty quick. Yeah.
Yeah, so certainly over time it will roll out, but something to check with your departmental or agency IT. A question from the Q&A. Do you have any recommendations of tools or platforms to use for virtual social mixture type events that would be more inclusive and accessible to all?
So there is no perfect platform. I think that's the key in a lot of this, and a lot of it depends on what type of activity you're trying to do. So I would say the short answer is your two most likely to be accepted platforms, or to have the least amount of barriers, are Microsoft Teams and Zoom, but each of them do have certain things that the other one doesn't. So there isn't a perfect platform, but even just how you actually do a presentation can make a huge difference. Like in Teams, for example, if you share the presentation rather than share your screen, all of the content of that presentation of the current slide is made available so that people who use text or print related tools like a screen reader or document reader or other tool can actually have it read to them, or portions of it read to them. Whereas, for example, in Zoom, it's just an image with no actual text.
Okay, that makes sense. We had some questions around sort of making things accessible from the design, the start of the design of a product or project. So in terms of looking at that, I think that's often a thing that's discussed is accessibility isn't a checkbox at the end of a project. It's thinking about it from the beginning. But do you have any tools that you would point our participants to in terms of like a checklist or something that would give them a start in terms of how to think about that and how to think about accessibility from the start?
I'll just highlight one of the things before we answer that question that we will send you is guides on creating inclusive meetings and virtual and remote meetings. We've got some material. And then to answer that specific question around inclusive design, it's like the guides themselves in the sense that you have to look at it as a whole process consideration. And it doesn't mean you just do it one thing at the very end or at a couple of stages. You have to treat it very similar to how you look at planning for official languages or security, in that it's very similar in the best way to respond for that kind of topic. We will send you some background material on that. But I think we had an earlier comment around design with people, design against the digital accessibility standards, design and verify your assumptions along the way throughout, and assume that there's a minimum viable product before you release something.
Absolutely. Great. Okay, our next question. So in today's virtual world, many of us haven't met our team. So especially people who have made any sort of job change. I know I've heard of people, getting laptops couriered to their house, and that's their onboarding experience. But how do I know if someone in my team has an accessibility need? What would you say is kind of the proper etiquette around that? Alors, comment puis-je savoir si un membre de mon équipe un besoin d'accessibilité et comment est-ce que je peux le demander d'une façon qui est respectueuse?
Well, I'll say from our experience is that the very first thing we always tell an individual if they have a disability or even if they have an injury or whatever it is that they require an accommodation is to talk to their manager. Not everybody knows who we are, but we are increasingly becoming more well known throughout the government. And depending on the department you're in, a lot of departments now will have disability management networks, et cetera, where, you know, if an individual has a fairly simple request, like maybe they just need a different keyboard or a mouse or something, then oftentimes our involvement isn't necessarily required, because if they can just make it happen, then that's the best part, right? It can just happen, and then something gets shipped to your door and then you're done. But the nice thing is that if something more is required, then we're not expecting disability management to be experts on accommodating an individual on the computer and knowing all the tools and technologies, et cetera. We're here to be able to do that. So they can then forward the request on to us if it's anything more than what's in their comfort zone.
And
so
to
definitely
approach
talk
that
to your manager.
To approach that the other way as well, the more you integrate things so that they're there by default, the less people will have to ask for special things. So if at the beginning of a meeting, you make sure that you have speaker rules, and that regardless of whether you have someone with a hearing related disability who can't hear when all kinds of people are talking, if you make that just part of your practices, they never have to put their hand up and ask for something. If you make sure your documents are following accessibility guidelines, someone with a print-related disability doesn't have to put their hand up and say, "Can you make a special version for me, please?"
And that also means that another facet of that is that inclusion is making sure that we have as much available by default to everybody as possible. So for example, having immersive reader available in the Office suite is huge, because anybody who needs the computer to talk to them, they don't have to ask for a special piece of software anymore, right? It's just there. It's just part of the default system that everybody gets. And like Jeff said, as long as people are following the document accessibility standards and whatnot when they're creating their content, then you don't have to put up a fuss. You don't have to be the one to single yourself out. You just have the tools that you need to do your job.
Absolutely. Anna Laurie, would you like to add anything in terms of, you know, how to approach your team in terms of accessibility needs and any best practices that you can think of?
Oh, I'm just nodding enthusiastically to everything that they just said, because I know that for myself, when I was preparing for this panel, I said also just to bake it into being by default, so that you ask everyone about their accessibility concern, and to not think about accommodations as something that only helps people with disabilities, but accommodations helps everyone to do their job. So that's all I wanted. I just wanted to echo everything that they said.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think managers, you know, can really be part of the solution there in terms of, you know, as we mentioned before, you know, sort of demystifying that process, making sure that employees are aware of, you know, the tools that are available to assist them, but also the processes that are in place to be able to facilitate any of these accommodation needs, and to be able to identify and find a solution. Because I think really it's a matter of, you know, not suffering in silence in terms of, you know, trying to make the best of a situation where you're not being properly accommodated or don't feel comfortable to bring up any accommodation needs. We have a couple of questions that have come in through the Q&A. So let's see, we'll go to, so the one question is about resource allocation. So needs may be entirely different, but the resources and time may be set to defaults only. I'm not sure if I exactly understand this question, but so needs may be entirely different. Okay, so we'll go to the next question maybe. So the next Q&A question is that the person had an AAACT info session took place in early July, and they haven't implemented all the recommendations yet. They're not sure if it's because they're a FSWEP hire, so they're part-time when school is in session or not. They're also not sure who to alert to how long this process is taking. So should they raise that to their manager or supervisor, to the AACT, to the department's studio to accommodate specialist? What should they do? Yeah, Jeff, over to you.
I will say that if you are not getting what you need, you have two people you need to be talking to. Your manager or supervisor, for one, because they have a huge role to play in making sure things are in place in an organization. The second one is every client who comes to meet with us, if there's more than the one-on-one initial consultation, there is a person who has been assigned to be your point of contact on a request. For FSWEP students, that's Holly and my team, or a couple of other people it might be, but essentially reach out to our main email address and highlight that there's a delay here. For me, I'm firmly of the opinion holding regular meetings is an important part of ensuring that people are tracking what's going on. So management supports like IT, HR, facilities, employee. So if you are in a situation where you don't have what you need, or what's been provided isn't working, or if there's other things missing, reach out to both those two areas, our area and your manager. And we have dedicated people who, a specific person who's your point of contact. And if you just email the main email address and you say, I don't know who my point of contact is, or I would like to be linked to them, they'll send out the email and send you back something.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Certainly as a manager, I've encountered situations where employees' accommodations took a long time to implement. And I think it really is on the organization to ensure that those are done in a timely manner, and that the employee has an understanding of what stands in the way of completing that process. So definitely follow, as you mentioned, follow up with your manager to make sure that things are happening. I've definitely experienced situations where the employee neared, filing a grievance because they weren't being accommodated properly, and got the union involved. And it was something that really we could resolve fairly quickly. It was just a matter of investing the time and making sure that the accommodation need was really addressed. So I think it's definitely key to ensure that your accommodation needs are being taken seriously by your manager, but that you're also aware of, is there a delay in terms of obtaining, a technology tool or something else that is part of your accommodation plan to be able to be accommodated for that need. So we're nearing the end of our session. So I'd like to give you each sort of 30 seconds maybe to provide any closing thoughts. So Anna Laurie, maybe we'll start with you if you have any thoughts you'd like to share as we finish off.
I think my final thought is whenever programming events or meetings, just because something is accessible from home, that doesn't mean that it's accessible for people with disabilities with a variety of concerns. Because I think that's the misconception. Oh, but it's online. I can get it from home. I can access it anywhere. But the reality is that it's more complex than that, as you know, by platforms. So that's all I had to say.
That's a very good point. Thanks very much for sharing that. Russell?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you guys for having me and having Jeff as well. And it's been a lot of fun. To be honest with you, accessibility is something that's very near and dear to my heart. I don't identify as having a disability, but I know a lot of people who do, especially since starting my current job. And one of the nice things about our team specifically is that over half of us identify as having a disability. So we have the lived experience as a group, and we get to see firsthand what some of those barriers are, whether it be someone not being able to access a tool or someone not being able to participate fully in a meeting or whatever it is. And it really inspires us to do our best work, not only in accommodating the individual when they need something, but also building that inclusiveness in, making sure that the stuff that we're purchasing and the stuff that we're building follows accessibility standards, considering accessibility throughout the process so that people don't have to ask for something special, don't have to single themselves out. So that's what keeps me going every day. And thanks very much for having us, and we'll keep doing the best we can to help people with disabilities.
Awesome. Thanks, Russell. Jeff, any final thoughts?
I would say my top 5 takeaways on any topic in this space are genesis, do it from the beginning. In leadership, know that when it's not accessible, that's when management and the organization has an opportunity to fix things, and managers have lots of ability to do that. Governance, make it formal, so it's not just part of your side of the work job, but it's woven in, just like security, just like official languages. Similarly, it's not one unit or one area, it's about building that ecosystem that everybody knows that it's not a lot of work and that it's not hard. It's just being deliberate and thoughtful. And lastly, striving for utopia, which is iterate, evolve, move forward. It's not something that we're going to get right the first time, but if we constantly move forward, the next time will be better, and the next time, and we'll learn, and that's where, you know, the next 10 years we'll be able to really see change, because the government of Canada is hugely committed to digital inclusion and accessibility and inclusive design and disability inclusion in general. So the time is right, the climate is right, the tools are there, the resources are there, we just need to access them.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Jeff. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our session. I will mention quickly, as I did during the session, that December 3rd is the International Day for Persons with Disabilities, and there will be a lot of different programming on that day and throughout the time period just before and after that day. So all of that programming is listed on GCpedia, on the IDPD site. Alors, je pense que c'est une bonne journée, une bonne période de voir les différents sujets par rapport à l'accessibilité. So I think it's a great time to really explore the topics of interest. So if you're an employee or a manager, get involved in that programming for sure. But a huge thanks to our panelists for joining us today and sharing your experience, sharing the tools, and we will post the video and any resources to our GC Wiki site after the event. Alors, merci à Anne-Laurie, à Jeff et puis à Russell pour nous joindre aujourd'hui. Et merci à tous nos participants de nous joindre partout au Canada. So thanks very much to everyone who joined us for today's session. And certainly stay tuned for our next programming and look into the programming that will happen on December 3rd. Thanks very much, everyone, and have a great day. Bye.
Thanks, Josh, and thanks everybody for coming.